Okay, hi. My name is Ralph Baker. This is Trump and the GE. It started as a quarterly speaker series to parse through the politicians' policies and how they affect the economy and the country and the community. Tonight we're going to discuss the Capitol riots finally, and I have with me Torian Mitchell. I'll let Torian give you a little bit about his background and introduce himself.
Sure. Torian Mitchell. Um, I guess do a couple of different things, but primarily COO of burgeoning education technology firm ACE, as well as wealth manager for primarily for MBEs. Um, so yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Okay, so there's been, obviously we like to start with the overview of the economy, um, a quick overview, and then we get into the initial topic. It's really about the economy. As far as I'm concerned, it's kind of hard to look at the economy's vital signs, which is what I like to talk about, because of the pandemic. And I think Pfizer and Moderna's vaccines have given us a pathway to a reopening of the economy. I think Johnson& and Johnson and Novavax are close to maybe getting emergency use authorization uh,
Yeah.
to to prevent the coronavirus. But for now, Pfizer, excuse me, and Moderna's vaccine are being distributed. Hopefully, they can be distributed or mass marketed over the next couple of months. I know they both have these cold storage issues where they have to be. I know Pfizer's have to be held at like stored like up to like negative 94 degrees. And
Yeah.
I think Moderna's has to be has to be frozen as well. So storing them and distributing them at the right room temperatures could be an issue. Maybe Novavax and Johnson could alleviate that. But at this point, until the pandemic ends, it's kind of hard to really discuss the how well the economy is doing. So I think a lot of the politicians and a lot of corporations have may have gotten a reset as far as the performance. Again, I think the economy is always a bubble looking for a pin, and ultimately the consumer still remains weak. The pandemic provided that pin that burst the bubble, but the consumer still remains weak, and I think we're going to start to see more every time there's a fissure or an event like the what's going on down in Texas right now. I think you're going to see mass people who need relief from the government. I think the economy is still, excuse me, the consumer is still very weak. I think you see people in Texas, given the cold weather down there, who still need aid from the government. I think one mayor, I'm not sure which city, said sink or swim, let them sink or swim, and that didn't go over too well. And I
Yeah.
saw in the media that a lady and her 8-year-old daughter, 9-year-old daughter, just died from carbon
Mm.
monoxide poisoning. They were in the car in the garage, had the car on, trying to stay warm. It's pretty sad. You look at a country as wealthy as the United States, that you have people trying to stay warm in a car in a garage. So I think every time there's an issue, I think you're going to see consumers who need aid from the government because the consumer is still pretty weak even after the financial crisis. So that's sort of my high level take on
Yeah. I mean, well, first, kind of my thoughts and prayers, and as well as some of the donations that I made, really to go out to, just some of the few folks that I have been able to try to help, because this is it's an atrocity that's going on in Texas right now. It really gets at the core of what we're talking about. Um, when we talk about the economy, and when I hear conversations about the economy, it's so easy to get into these very high level, very high intellectual conversations, and talk about metrics, and talk about different economic theories and philosophies, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very easy to get away from at the end of the day, the economy is reflected by the people's material conditions. That's really what it is at its core. And economics is simply a recording of that. And it's just something that for me, I just keep in mind, and hearing some of the stories myself, um, one it just kind of broke my heart because it really hit close to home for me reading about um, another mother and a child. The child was 5 days old, and the child ended up dying because of the lack of both heat and food, because I believe the child or the mother wasn't able to breastfeed, so there wasn't access to be able to get the formula that the child needed, and literally passed away from starvation and hypothermia. And I had to put the phone down for a moment, and just kind of send a prayer, but also be thankful for my own children as well. And it just really brings home how fragile things are. Really puts the emphasis on that mayor that did, I believe it was a Facebook post, ended up resigning, I think the next day, and ended the post with something crass, like think or swim, or fight or flight, son, just something completely asinine, telling folks, essentially espousing striverism ideology, that it's time to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, which is just stupid, frankly. Like, I'm not even gonna try to find better words, just stupid. It's just it's flatly stupid and idiotic. And I don't think that he could have done anything better than resigning, other than getting folks the resources that they actually needed to fix the grids, to get the electricity, getting folks food. I think it really paints a clear picture of the thing that you and I have talked about, in previous shows, but even offline, and so many conversations that I have, where this economy is really hanging on by a thread. And we saw it, we often see it actually with almost every hurricane season when it hits, typically southern states, but more so when we get these massive natural disasters. Just saw, the amount of fires that are happening on the West Coast, all the way from, Washington State through California. Folks having to leave their home, millions of acres being burned to the ground. Folks are still dealing with that right now, although it hasn't been spotlighted in the news cycle as of lately. But folks are still dealing with that, still haven't recovered from that. When we think back to Katrina in '05, which feels like a lifetime ago, and it took almost a decade for folks to finally get resettled. How many folks unnecessarily died because of FEMA's, one, because FEMA was gutted, and then two, there was some incompetency in the leadership that went all the way up to the White House and really dropped the ball, and many both poor and Black people died unnecessarily through Katrina, and we're seeing the same thing here with Texas. So although Katrina to me was to me is what other sign did we need that infrastructure needed to be, investments in infrastructure in this nation needed to happen, which would impact the job market significantly. Like, what other sign did we need that this economy is fragile in a very real sense. And now to see Texas, one of the largest states in the country, is uh, hit with a snowstorm. We're not even talking about like a nor'easter where like Boston and New York gets 20, 30 inches of snow every year. They got a couple of inches, and they had over was a 100-car pileup from the snow. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that.
Yeah, 100-car pileup. And now folks are literally using snow to flush their toilets, to try to boil as potable water, and it's like an episode of Bear Grylls, and they just been dropped off in the wilderness. So yeah, it's to me, although it's a microcosm, I don't think we can get a better example of what's happening in Texas right now that exemplifies on almost every level of what's happening in the economy in a very real sense.
Right, right. So for years, even after I think I still go back to the financial crisis. Our reaction to the financial crisis was to spend money to bail out corporations, and rising tides will lift all boats. I mean, in what world? Especially for African Americans, because when Ronald Reagan said that, started talking about this trickle down theory, Black people knew it was what my father would call, or my Aunt Frances would call a trick bag. And that's the only way, to describe it. It's like, it's a trick bag. And it's pretty, quick and dirty way to describe it, that it wasn't going to help Black folks. Now, in 2008, 2009, what have you, when the Obama administration comes aboard, rising tides will lift all boats, and people thought that was going to work. And so, without a strong consumer, I don't think the economy can stay strong for too long. And I think one of the I think Professor Brockman said earlier, one of these events, was how even during the Great Depression, our reaction was to try to spur business fixed investment. If you have all this business fixed investment, you have all these automakers building cars, and a lot of them went bankrupt.
Right.
Who was going to buy the cars? So we try to spur business fixed investment, but if you have all this planning equipment and new buildings and industrial activity, who's going to buy the automobiles? Who's going to buy the products that we're generating, that we're producing, if we don't have a strong consumer? And quite kept over the past couple of years, the consumer spending has kept the economy strong, while business fixed investment has been pulling back. The corporations have started to realize that maybe we should pull back on industrial activity until we can find people, make sure we have enough demand for what we're producing. And consumers kept spending. And then when the pandemic hit, people realized I probably couldn't go 6 months without a paycheck. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that was a commercial, and then I think people are going to pull back. I think obviously some people are going to spend like crazy. They've been cooped up in their houses for months, but I think large amount of consumers are going to start pulling back because they realize that they probably couldn't go 6 months without a paycheck, and survive. So I think you're going to see consumer spending pull back once the economy, eventually reopens. As far as infrastructure is concerned, I think we do need infrastructure investing. I think somebody also talked about, corporations trying to privatize some of these activities. When you try to privatize some things, and some of these public goods probably shouldn't be privatized. And Mr. Davis, he couldn't join the event tonight because because of the weather. And I grew up in Virginia. We had gas heat. We also had wood stove, and we always stack wood in the wintertime, because every winter there was an ice storm, and the lights would be out and the heat would be out for a couple of days. It happened like twice, 2 or 3 times every winter. We go 3 or 4 days without heat. And what are you gonna do? So we always use a wood stove. So you have to have a backup plan. That was our backup plan. We always had a stack, had to stack wood in the summertime, and we always had a wood stove. And we take this time of year, we take wood to like some of the people who sick and shut in, or maybe some of the elderly people in the community. We would chop wood and take it to them. And we always had a backup plan. You always prepared for like 2 or 3 days. It happened 2 or 3 times in the wintertime where you had to, you had to go 3 or 4 days without heat.
Right.
Take
Yeah.
not like New York City. You have these you have to get to some of these back roads to try to chop down trees to get to the trees that fall in the middle of the road, or icy roads where it took days for to get to some of those back roads, to get the power lines back up. So we always have to
Yeah.
plan for that. But I guess Houston, I guess they haven't really had too many ice storms in recent memory. But it's crazy the stories you're hearing about people barely surviving because they found a friend or a relative who let them stay in their garage that had heat or what have you. You have people outside trying to get water from a spigot, lines of people.
Yeah.
You're going to see every major event, you're going to see more people need government aid because of the weak consumer. And this is just a commercial for that. Things that we've been talking about, and people kind of look at you like, what are these people talking about? But now you see how weak the consumer really is.
Now, I think you hit on a couple of good points, and one of the things, just kind of going back to the earlier statement, because I feel like I've been hearing that more and more lately. Rising tides lift all boats, and I think much to your response, like, where is that true? And I think, especially for Black people, where is that? Where is that true? Within this country, within this hemisphere. And one of the things that often comes to mind, which really gets at the core of this conversation, is I think it could be true, were it not for institutional racism. Is really, that's a class conversation, a class perspective. Rising tides lift all boats. With a focus on capitalism, and when you are not Black, you have the luxury of not considering anything outside of a class struggle. Right? If I'm, born into poverty, if I'm born into low educated household, well, I can take some reasonable steps to to lift myself out of poverty. I can, hopefully become educated, hopefully get a better job than what my parents and my grandparents had, and be able to put food on the table and move out of maybe a federal poverty line and into middle class. And that really just goes back, I think, to this 1950s version of the Make America Great Again slogan, where you could have a household, raise a family on an income of one, which is long since been gone. But that promise was never fulfilled. That promise has never been that, specifically for Black people, primarily because when you have policies that are enacted on a systemic level that are preventing that rising of all boats when the tides, began to rise. And one of the biggest tides that we saw was the New Deal. When we go back to FDR, we look at the social programs. It was one of the biggest governmental rollouts in the country's nation, or in the country's history at that point. And we saw a massive rise of an actual middle class, and it was no longer just rich and poor. However, when we look at who was largely left out, Black folks are largely left out of FHA loans. This is where the redlining comes in. How many of our veterans were coming back from World War II that were denied GI Bills, that weren't getting their pensions on almost every level, although there were some labor participation, especially amongst Black women, actually. During World War II, the largest majority of folks were still left out. So because you had policies that were specifically disconnecting the tide from rising your boat. That's why we've never seen, and frankly, an equal rising. And in some instances, when a lot of boats rose, ours were actually sinking. So, I think, just kind of fast forwarding into how is that playing out today? Well, we see that. I think I even tweeted out. This is the impact of Reagan's deregulation. I said, and now this mofo is dead, and we're living in the consequence of that administration's decisions to allow deregulation within the country. And now, we have an entire state that, unlike the rest of the union, they are an independent electrical grid. And you have all these various service providers that are really playing a zero-sum game. And at the end of the day, is stripping from the consumer, is stripping from the ability to be able to provide stable jobs, the ability to be able to provide some independence. And, we can argue on the various theories of whether, capitalism, which, I would argue that this is the core, but it's not only capitalism because, the U.S. doesn't practice capitalism in a very pure sense anyhow. So whether you're more leftist, whether you're more mainstream, at the end of the day, I guess the purity test, so to speak, would fail because you're not in a system where a free market is abound and folks are able to see both the risk and reward of capitalist activities. And you're not in a purely socialist environment either, where the people get to essentially decide what is good for them versus a few, especially when it comes to the ownership of property. So, yeah, I think that really all ties into the core of what we're seeing, and how the economy is going to potentially bounce back. I think I'm in agreement with you. I think we will see kind of a dead cat bounce, within the next year, depending on how the vaccines roll out. I know in California, for example, the governor is saying he's vaccinating over 150,000, something between 130 and 150,000 people a day, with the goal of 7 million, I think, by year's end. We're seeing different contracts being rolled out from both Pfizer, Moderna, Novavax, and even some smaller biopharma players that are getting contracts from the government to, produce a vaccine and get that vaccine rolled out. And we will get to see some of that effect of what it's going to look like with the economy when it does gets back to some sense of normalcy. By and large, yeah, I think it is going to have a dead cat bounce that's going to address some of the pent up, the pent up buying. Folks want to be able to spend money, and not just for the sake of spending money, but for the sake of being social. Like being out, getting out the house, being able to go to a restaurant, being able to go to a movie, being able to drive a vehicle, interact with their neighbors, friends, throw, get-togethers and parties, and celebrate special moments, graduations, things of that nature. All that has been missed over the last 12 months. So I think we will see that pent-up spike that's going to happen. And after that, really economic release, that's when we're going to see the real economy at that point where, like it's, to me, it's asinine that gone 12 months and a $2,000 check is still a conversation. And, you got, you have Biden doing math now. Well, I promised $2,000, but I really meant 1,400 plus the 600 that you already got.
Right,
So,
right. You're right. Right. You see why he kept his and so the funny part about it, I'm dating myself, but I've seen Joe Biden run for president a few times already and drop out early.
Man.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I'm like it's like I'm one of those Spike Lee movies where he plays tricks with the cameras.
Yeah.
The room is spinning. So
Yeah.
when Biden won 80 million votes, the room was spinning. I'm like, Joe Biden really won that many votes? The same Joe Biden has been running for president since I remember. And he was slick. He never really mentioned a plan. I had people telling me about we need to resist Trump and Joe Biden. You need to vote for Joe Biden. And Joe Biden never gave his economic plan. He never told you his plan for the reopening the economy.
Not one.
Vaccines. He never said a word. Then when he got elected, started talking, people were looking like, huh? Like, yeah, that's a Joe Biden I know. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, he sometimes you have to give people what they wish for, what they ask for. And I tell the story about I played high school basketball. When I was in elementary school, the whole town knew I wanted to play high school basketball. It was known.
Right.
My sixth grade gym teacher, her brother was the basketball coach, the junior varsity basketball coach. She knew. And they lo and behold, I made the team. Like 4'11", 4'11". I weighed like 85 pounds, 8th grade. And everybody was looking like, first of all, they couldn't figure out why I was going out for the team. There's no way these guys are gonna make it. When I made it, guys who got cut were kind of salty. Like Salt Lake City out here. Like this guy, he must be the coach's pet or something. There's no way this guy is, can really, have a basketball team. And so, I had a good friend of mine. We were talking smack. I was the 15th guy to make the team. He was the 16th guy. So the coach kept 14 players. We were both getting cut. And so we were talking about what we were going to do when the game started and so on and so forth. It's going for like weeks. And the first game of the season started and it was packed. Whole town there. And we're winning. We're all happy on the bench. Fourth quarter, we up by like 30 points. And we started rooting for the other team because we didn't want to play. So coach called me going to the game. I didn't hear him. I just sat there. And sent somebody out to the bench to grab me and make me go to the scores table. I looked at the scores table, looked around, taking my warm-ups off. Then I had an epiphany. This is why people don't play high school basketball. Because you could go out here and get embarrassed out here. You know what I'm saying? If you are who you say you are, the whole town is going to know. If I could have crawled back to that bench, I would have. They wouldn't let me go back. And something I wanted for years and years and years. And when I got it, I didn't want it anymore. You know what I'm saying? Because there's a risk to us. You know what I'm saying? You can go out here and get embarrassed. And when I grew up, if you go out on the basketball court and got embarrassed, you couldn't ride a school bus the next day. Your mom would drive you to school. You know what I mean? Yep. So anyway, it worked out. But what I'm saying, sometimes you got to give people what they wish for. Joe Biden wanted to be the president, and now he's the president. Everybody wanted Joe Biden. Everybody wanted to resist Trump, and blah, 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 blah. And that Joe Biden told you he doesn't have a plan for the vaccine, which we already knew all along. He was holding it till after he got elected. But so this is what he wished for, and now we have an economy where we consumer and we're gonna have to keep reacting to these events. But as far as rising tides lift all boats, I think you see, again, that's why the UK is leaving the EU and with Brexit. And people are tired of these central banks printing money and giving it to hedge fund managers and the investor class. You saw the rise of Beppe Grillo in Italy, the rise of Marine Le Pen in France. And so it's no secret, no surprise that it would come here. The other thing, as far as the pandemic, I think again, when the economy reopens, I think you're gonna see consumers consumers sort of pull back, and you have all these central banks around the world with the same policy. So if it works, they're brilliant. If it doesn't work, you can't really blame anybody because they're all doing the same thing. You had the central bank in Japan, you had Mario Draghi in Europe, and obviously Janet Yellen and Ben Bernanke here. So they kind of all covered because they're all doing the same thing. Um, so that's sort of my take on the economy. But Joe Biden got what he wished for. That's what he asked for,
No,
and he has it.
yeah,
So here we are.
no, that's absolutely it. I mean, I think it was pretty much all smoke and mirrors. This guy, running, said he would cancel some student debt. Didn't do that. Said he had a plan for COVID, and then comes back and says, "Well, I actually don't have a plan for COVID."
What he said? He said we're gonna be living with the coronavirus for the rest of the year.
Yeah, yeah. I think he had to finally admit that he actually didn't have a plan, and
Right, but
then
he didn't say that during the debates though, right?
yeah,
He
no, he
made
did.
he made it seem like didn't he make it seem like he had a plan that was different from
Like,
Trump?
they pulled up old tweets that he specifically said that he would be able to solve
Right,
COVID, and folks are holding him to account. Kind of late in the game to be holding the president to account after you
right.
vote. They admonished a couple of people for speaking out and wanting to essentially get a plan. What is the plan? What are the tangibles before I give you my vote? And they pretty much, got almost stomped out of the the country for even asking questions.
My
Uh,
question.
yeah, like Ice Cube comes to mind when he came out with a contract for Black America, and he got attacked from every side, almost regardless of perspective. But point is that this is exactly who the folks said they wanted because they felt that this was better than having Trump in office. Um, I would argue that, I think the only person that really had a better chance of doing a better job was Bernie. And, without going off into that deep end, because I do, I will put on my kind of conspiracy theory hat a bit as to why Bernie got the rug pulled from under his feet from the DNC. I think that the DNC really had no intention. The Democrats really had no intention of doing a third of what Bernie was, was standing on and have been standing on for decades at this point. So, I think they said, yeah, we got to get him out of here, and we
Right.
need.
I think the public has we go on logic. I don't think politicians do. I think the politicians knew that Bernie got elected and he did half the stuff he was suggesting. They would burn bridges with their donors, their corporate donors. Their goal is to keep their corporate donors in place and keep getting donations. And I think that's it. Whether they lose, they still have the donors in place. And that's the thing about it that the Republicans and the Democrats, they all have the same donors. So there really any different between them. But as far as Joe Biden is concerned, I think we already see him kind of like, I don't know if it's flip flopping, but he's kind of like gives conflicting statements on certain issues. I don't think he really has. I wouldn't say he doesn't stand for anything. I don't think he really has a strong opinion on a lot of things, a lot of issues. So I think you can see him flip flopping back and forth. But so we'll make a segue to the Capitol riots. when I, to me, it was to me the when they gathered at the Capitol, that was like another event that Trump had, another rally for Trump after the election, right? To me, I think they had gotten together in Georgia, and I'm thinking like, wow, it just kind of he was just kind of embarrassing the country where you see hundreds of thousands of people after the election are going to go down to Georgia or go to Washington D.C. Um, for a Trump rally, and I don't think Joe Biden could get 10 people to a barbecue. You know, assuming I know he didn't campaign that hard, but it's like a disconnect. Like, how can Joe Biden win 80 million votes when he couldn't get people half, 1/3 of the people that Trump got at these rallies. And Trump was kind of embarrassing, I think, the public and showing how strong his brand was and how big of a following he has. And so I didn't really pay much attention to the DC gathering until after the fact, till like, wow, they said people stormed the Capitol building, so on and so forth. And the media just ran with it, using words like insurrection and blah, 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 blah. But when forget about what you think about the election, whether it was fair play or not. You have, again, with the same thing with the guys from Reddit and on Wall Street Bets, you have a lot of young white people who felt like what it was like to be black for a day or a week. Then you got tens of millions of Americans, white Americans, who felt like what it was like to be black, or in their foundation, in their feelings, who feel like their vote maybe did not count, or maybe they were disenfranchised. And African Americans know what that's like, for decades. What like not to have your vote counted, or not to really mad at America. That's not going to sit well with white America. Let's be honest. And I was waiting for a riot. I was waiting for days, like, where the real white people, please stand up. Like, where are these people? Somebody's gonna let this ride? And they're calling these things like insurrection and heinous. And like, this is just some, to me, just some white people got together for a picnic down at the Capitol building. I think they had done some reconnaissance the day before. I don't think I don't think there were a lot of guns or a lot of shootings and nothing like that. I mean, they really wanted to create some havoc. They could have. I think they wanted to scare people and just show this is our building. This is our federal building. We pay taxes. This is our country. This is our building. And politicians just work here. You work for us. And you saw pictures of politicians hiding under the tables, and it was crazy. But anyway, make a long story short, I'm talking about what these people are capable of. You know what I mean? When they feel angst or they feel threatened, historically they've gone through entire black towns and burned down black towns and black people in them. You look at Wilmington, North Carolina. You look at the town in Arkansas where they killed a couple hundred people around, I guess, with 1919, 1920, killed a couple hundred black people. Tulsa, Oklahoma, Wilmington, North Carolina. I forgot the town in Arkansas, but they killed like, a couple hundred people who did not want to be tied to the land, who did not want to be, sharecroppers anymore, wanted to get out from under these arrangements where every year someone's trying to figure out a way for them to be tied to the land. You did the work, now you want to get paid, and the guy who owns the land says, oh, we got some additional expenses where you owe us. You didn't make a profit. You actually owe $500. Sounds like these arrangements where they have like these artists like Meek Mill and all these people sign these record deals, and they can never figure out like, how come I always owe the record company? So it sounds like one of those arrangements. But when you're talking about what these people are capable of, that Capitol riot wasn't really a riot. It was just some white people who went. I'm sorry, somebody died. A couple of people died. I mean, that's not good. But you're talking about people who rioted and burned down entire towns and entire black towns and black people in them. And as far as so I think it's kind of overblown. And I don't think any black people, at least older black people, are shocked about the what happened in the Capitol building, because you have millions of white Americans who feel like their vote didn't count. Whether it's true or not, that's how they felt, and it should never have come to that, where you have these oddities where you have 100,000 votes come in one city during the election, and all 100,000 votes are for Biden, none for Trump. It seems like an oddity. But to me, the Capitol riots was like, I think they're overblowing it. I think they're um, it's a bunch. I think they're sensationalizing it. It wasn't, good. But who would have thought that wasn't going to happen after the election, after people felt that their votes weren't counted? That's sort of my high level take on it.
Yeah, no, I do think that this has been really for the last 3 years that Trump has been in office. Every year we've seen this activity throughout the country. Folks just weren't connecting the dots and at least publicly predicting that that same level of violence and activity would come to the doorsteps of a congressional building. Like, for example, when we think back to Charlottesville, and the tiki torches, and the folks that got ran over. I think one young lady, one of the protesters, ended up getting killed as well. And even prior to the insurrection, remember the plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan. They stormed the governor's I think the governor's mansion and the federal building in Lansing, in the capital of Michigan. And then prior to the insurrection as well, we were seeing within Portland, excuse me, all of the battles with the police that were happening in Portland leading up to this moment. I think it raged on for about 2 weeks. To the point that it left the news cycle, returned back to the news cycle and supposedly Antifa. I think that's part of the issue is getting to the truth. Who is who? You have a lot of bad actors. Like what we saw over the summer after George Floyd was murdered by the cops. And we saw a lot of bad actors pretending to be BLM, ended up being police officers, ended up being different agents, pretending to be Antifa, pretending to be BLM protesters, and obviously pushing a narrative in hopes to get spotlighted to, push one side of a narrative. So in other words, getting to the truth required getting through some layers on who is who, who's the bad guys, who's the good guys in the story. So I think for most folks that were paying attention, in other words, ironically, this action wasn't even the worst of the ones that I just named.
Right. Right. It was more like a picnic, right?
It literally made Portland made this thing, look like a couple people were just throwing rocks at a window. Because Portland almost looked like a live battle scene. So as to the efficacy, I think you can almost pinpoint in history the times that white people have felt disenfranchised. And anytime that they have felt disenfranchised, ironically, they take to the same actions that black people get penalized, jailed, killed, and certainly criticized for. When we think back to the LA riots after the Rodney King verdict, and what was the primary narrative? Oh, they're just burning up their own neighborhoods. They're burning up their own communities, etc. That's always the biggest criticism. Even when we think back to the riots that went throughout LA, Detroit, Chicago, St. Louis, after MLK was assassinated, which eventually led to LBJ's signing of the Civil Rights Act 64 and 65. But the long and short is that although Black people have rioted more, to me that evidences the lack of power, because anytime that white people riot, although it's fewer and farther between, it results in the same action. In other words, that they feel disenfranchised. That was the whole Boston Tea Party. That was the whole American Revolution. Even when the gangs, kind of the wars of New York, when the Italians felt disenfranchised, what do? They went to war with the government. They literally went at the government. When the Irish felt disenfranchised, what do? They went to war with the Italians, and then went to war with the government, and then it became the fighting arm of the government. That's why so many Irish were police officers within New York. They pretty much had a monopoly on the police union within New York. So, in other words, we see the same effects when they feel disenfranchised, when they feel that their vote doesn't count. Like you said, whether it's true or not, we have yet to see any real evidence that there was any voter fraud, any voter tampering, any changing of votes, etc. But it doesn't have to be true necessarily in order to feel or to have that perception. And I think that's what we were looking at, is a culmination of what has happened over the really, again, I'm putting it on the doorstep of Reagan. You could economically, at least, we can even argue going back to Nixon. But, when you have an eroding of jobs, when you have an eroding of education, when you have an eroding of the quality of those jobs. So even when the job sector is rising, but the sector itself, the quality it doesn't pay a living wage, frankly. If people can't afford off of one income to be able to put a roof over their head, put food in their belly on a consistent basis, then it is going to lend to an erosion of confidence within that economy, within the country. And in a very practical sense, it doesn't take much to, push a message that folks can jump on board with. And now you see the impact, you see the impact of it. And these folks felt like, what else is left? You're kicking out, got rid of my jobs. You made education unattainable. Even when education is attained, you're straddled with significant amount of debt, jobs that can't pay off that education, jobs that can't pay off a mortgage, jobs that can't pay off a car note. And now you told me, well, if I, get involved in the political machine, that we the people should be able to determine our future. And now you're taking my president. This really is the sentiment, whether right or wrong, whether we agree with it or not. This is the sentiment, and it doesn't take much. It doesn't take a Russian, it doesn't take the Russians to intercede. It doesn't take, a ton of Facebook ads and messages to push folks that are already on a ledge.
Right. Right. So you have it's not just not just, you have people who may not be able to earn a living wage, but they also see other people living well and not necessarily based on their own talent. So you have a recession for some people and not a recession for others, because people who, the investor class who benefited from these policies, this money printing from the Federal Reserve and bailouts, they're living well expensive for everybody else, and it's not trickling down. What's trickling down is higher costs. Again, you have people who may not be able to earn a living wage, but also costs are rising at the same time. But specifically for things that we need, so you have a stagflation in a lot of key areas for what I call inelastic goods, like gas prices going up, real estate, housing that keeps going up, and the media keeps writing about how that's a good thing. So I think it kind of amplifies the problem. And I'm from Virginia, so you start talking about messing with these statues, you're gonna get a reaction from people, which seems to be the whole purpose. Why would you take down Robert E. Lee's monument at the clear blue sky? Why would you take down Robert E. Lee's monument in Charlottesville for what? There's some bigger fish to fry, or in Richmond. And I remember, I remember pointing out specifically on one of these events that it was really that guy Clyburn from South Carolina who triggered all this stuff, because they got the politician Clementa Pinckney, who had been murdered at the Emmanuel Baptist Church because a young white kid thought that the government was taking away his rights. And Clementa Pinckney was on the state Senate floor, pushing to have police cameras, and we've turned into a police state now. If you try to undo that police state, then you have young white people thinking that you're taking away their rights. So we never should come to this police state to begin with. And so Clyburn and other black politicians have signed off on those crime bills. Only reason they started singing a new tune because the younger kids started questioning, why are all these people getting locked up? Why are these black people getting locked up? 1 in 3 black men locked up simply for being black, especially for quality of life crimes, in serious times for quality of life crimes. And you had black politicians who would sign off on those bills for decades. They were only going to affect their people in their community and their constituents. Then you have Clyburn trying to change the narrative from this police state to we need to remove the flag.
Yeah.
Raise a straw man argument. And as soon as he said we need to remove this flag, there's all this push to remove the flag in South Carolina. There was this big push to remove these monuments all around the country. And I thought there was taking the focus off of all this money that the Obama administration had printed and gave it to its donors, or in the investor class, and that took away because it's a trick bag. I've been black for 50 years. Nobody's ever asked any black person in the state of Virginia what you think about a monument. At the clear blue sky, the corporate media will put a microphone in front of your face and want to know what you think about Robert Lee's monument. I have no comment. It's a trick bag. And then you have, and this is another good example, another point I'm about to make, as far as what a lot of people don't realize is that you have the media in New York. You have a lot of black people in the media in New York, the Negro whisperers, who were saying, "Yeah, let's take down the flag in South Carolina." They're screaming from New York.
Yeah.
And so you have black people in South Carolina march and take down the flag and protest and don't even know why they're out there. I think they take down the flag or did something they did. Some policy came up with about how the flag would be used in South Carolina and throughout the South. And guess what the state of South Carolina does? They cut funding for the African American Museum in South Carolina and cost a lot of black people jobs. So you think you're gonna take down these flags and take down these statues and that there aren't gonna be any repercussions from it? That's silly. And so I always said that even Charlottesville, the one thing that the people who were fighting in Charlottesville, the conservatives and the liberals, the one thing they all had in common was that none of them benefited from these policies from the Obama administration. That's probably what they're really out there fighting about. You know what I'm saying? And so as far as the Capitol riots are concerned, you have all these, the media keeps trying to find these narratives. Oh, it's just like Charlottesville. No, it's kind of like Charlottesville, not exactly, because Charlottesville is about, the monuments. It's also, it's also another example of social unrest. But, the trying to amplify, try to sort of sensationalize these Capitol riots compared to what these people are capable of doing, compared to what could potentially come down the road. You have African Americans in the media, you have black people in social and online talking about, what if black people had done that? Get out of the way. Do not get involved. Do not,
That's a fight.
doesn't bother you, has nothing to do with you. Just your vote didn't count back in November. It's just another thing you have to deal with that week. You know what I'm saying? If you're black, okay. And so leave it alone. Do not get involved. But what if black people done that? You want the right to actually storm the Capitol building? That's what you want. That's what you're fighting for. It just got silly. Get out of the way because there's a wave coming. These people feel like their votes were they feel like they were disenfranchised. Their votes didn't count. And again, I keep thinking about Black Tulsa. I'm thinking about Arkansas. I'm thinking about Wilmington, North Carolina. I'm thinking about all these what these people capable of. They've gone through whole town, they've burned down the whole town. Even in the state of Virginia, where I'm from, there was a party, interracial party called the Riots Party. I call it a black party, but it's really an interracial party. It was so successful they had to get rid of it. They actually murdered black politicians in this party. Conservative Democrats and the Republican Party attacked black politicians in the Readjust Party. Eventually, the black politicians had to fight back. Then they went to the newspapers and said the black people attacked them. Why would black politicians who were in charge of the state attack you? So these people will murder black politicians and burn their entire towns because they wouldn't stand down and they wouldn't let the other parties rule. What do you think? What do you think is going to happen if these people feel like their votes did not count? I mean, again, to me, the Capitol riots were what they call the Capitol riots. I call it Capitol picnic or Capitol barbecue. Was tame compared to what these people are capable of doing. And black people just get out of the way. Get out of the way. I carry my book with me everywhere I go in case something pop up. See, I'm on your side. I told y'all this was gonna happen. So I think black people just sort of just get out of the way and just something. I don't say it doesn't affect us, but it's people who woke up one day and realized what it was like to be black for a day, and they didn't like it.
Oh yeah, I had to laugh because the day I think the day of, I think it was like Wednesday or something. But the day of what was trending on Twitter, and I said leave it to Black Twitter, that people would start making memes of them going back to sleep.
hopefully under an alias.
That's none of my business. That was my sentiment. I didn't even watch much of the news because I was like, what that got to do with me? Like, what does that have to do with my community? Like, that literally is not our fight. In fact, I think what came to my attention was, I think it was like two black people that were there and became memes almost. And of course, the one brother that went into the Capitol and took a picture took a picture. And while most of the folks were getting out of jail, making bail, guess who was still sitting in jail? And
the hood reporter?
Bail.
So, what was his bail again?
Say that again.
What was his bail again?
I don't remember the amount, but I know that I don't think he had like any priors or something. Like, it was just something, like it was just ridiculous in the sense that he didn't damage any property. Clearly this guy.
Yeah, but he didn't have a leg to stand on. No black people. NAACP ain't coming to his aid. You did what? He said, "Oh yeah, I was just there to capture the to take footage for the Democratic Party or for something for Black Lives Matter or something like that." He pulled a Jussie Smollett quick, like.
That brother looked like he was a tourist and got lost, got swept up. But it just goes to show that, this is not our fight. Yes, and it was primarily, talking heads. Van Jones, of course, and his emotional self, and that whole, I think, cohort of Negro whisperers, was just talking to be talking, because it really didn't have anything to do with us. It didn't have, almost to your point of what is the purpose of pulling down, monuments and even renaming schools. I was like, I think if you ask most students, even those that have attended a school that was named after a Black person, who is this person? Most people were like, I don't know, man. Like, that was my school. Don't even know who that person actually was, or why their school was named after them. So in terms of what is the impact, it's a distraction. And, to me, for Black people's intents and purposes, this was simply another distraction, because it is not, how does one pulling down a monument, how does the Capitol riot, how does that change your material conditions? To want to even expend energy on the face of power, taking down a monument is not power. Changing the name of a school is not power. What's power is upending the very system that created this inequity within the country. That's power. Power is now destroying the actual policies and legislation that, when we talk about white supremacy and when we talk about systemic racism, we're really talking about the judiciary. We're talking about the legislative branch. That's what we're talking about.
Right.
When upending that process, upending the policies, that is power. Then we can talk
the power is also propping up another person, another African American, to praise these symbols and crowd out people like you and me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if you're talking, that's why you're not on CNN besides Van Jones. You know what I'm saying? Because the people in the corporate media are, they're basically, praising a lot of symbolism. They're promoting a lot of symbolism, taking down the monuments. Let's take down the monuments. But they never really, and talk about slavery was bad. During slavery, Black folks had to work for free. Really? I mean, like, that's some deep thinking. I mean, if you can't tell me any more than what Alex Haley told me back in 1976, why are you talking about slavery? You know what I'm saying? And so, you have a lot of African Americans who go for the red card, go for the trick bag. Oh yeah, they had took down a monument in my it's a monument in my hometown, Farmville, Virginia. The soldier, beautiful statue, and the death of song. I didn't know what it was. I just knew that it was a young man who had. I read it one day, and a young man who had died during the Civil War. And I'm thinking, like, if he had fought harder, maybe fought better, maybe the situation would have been different. Maybe my situation would have been different. So the statues, to me, I love them. So that means you lost. You know what I mean? They took down a monument in my hometown. They took down the statue, didn't take down the whole monument. So they left the monument up there, and also left the inscription.
Okay.
And so they took down the soldier, the young soldier, or what have you. And what a lot of people don't realize is that, okay, you take down this monument, can the city afford to remove that monument? Some of these monuments are huge. Can you afford to? When they found out how much it costs to remove the monument, they had different tone. But a lot of African Americans go for the symbolism and go for the emotional talk of, let's take down monuments, let's take down the flag. But if you start talking about the people who have gotten a lot of publicity, African Americans have gotten a lot of publicity for being pro-Black and being activists, they never talk about upending anybody's white supremacy or threatening anybody's white supremacy, which makes them so popular. They talk about the problem, never talk about the solutions.
And that's exactly it.
Which makes them so popular. But as far as interesting thing about Trump is that people say that Biden won the election. If the Democrats really felt that Biden won the election fair and square, why do they fear Trump so much? Why are they trying to keep him from running for another term? They want to besmirch his character and turn the people against him. The harder they try, the worse it gets. The more goofy they look. This impeachment, his lawyers just made these people look stupid. Showed a lot of footage that we've been seeing on TV, how it had been cut off, and they only showed you what they want the public to hear. And they also showed some of the Democrats talking about similar language to incite riots, and they're trying to make Donald Trump a person who incited the Capitol riots or what have you. But they're trying hard to dismiss his character and then trying to make sure he can't run again. Why are they so hell bent on him not running again if they beat him fair and square? You know what I'm saying? Their behavior seems to be contradictory to what they're saying. If they thought that Biden won, they thought that Biden could win again, why would they care if Trump? Why they keep trying to bury Trump if they thought Biden won fair and square?
Definitely speaks to, I think, something a bit more insidious, because in my opinion, they went after Trump, and Trump, let's be clear, because I'm certainly not advocating for Trump. I'm not advocating for his return, but I'm also not demonizing his presidency either. There has to be some objectivity where we can inject some common sense to be able to engage with policies regardless of who wrote it, in order to view, well, what's the efficacy of that policy, who benefited, who lost. There are unfortunately winners and losers in this economy, and with our governmental structure, not everyone can nor will win. And when we're recording who are the winners and losers, that's where that objectivity has to come in. But with that said, to me, they went after Trump with the same fervor that they went after Bernie. It's like, why would you, I think the same question has to happen if it's truly a democratic process and people are truly left to be the dictators of the future by simply casting the vote, then why prevent a Bernie stepping in? Why use the symbolism of a secondary impeachment only to acquit? Like, that was the thing. They ended up acquitting Trump within this impeachment. So all of this was just pomp and circumstance. All of this has been symbolism. All of this, including Biden. Biden is pure symbolism. It's the height of symbolism.
You would think Biden would have a comment on this impeachment hearing, right? If it's just symbolism and it's just pomp and circumstance, you would think Biden's oddly silent. He doesn't sound like a leader to me.
At all. He hasn't even said anything about Texas. Like, that's ironic. He hasn't even addressed the country about what's happening right now. Even Bush addressed the country about Katrina. And when we look at the competency, Bush kind of sat at the pinnacle of the clown seat. That here's the most competent president within our time. And the man could barely get through a sentence without stumbling. He could barely, call on accurate names. He was the first meme before a meme was a thing.
Right.
And when we look at the way he was treated, Trump was really treated no different than Bush, except towards the end of Bush's Bush got a secondary term. I think there's some parallelism between the way Bush was treated and the way that Trump was treated. However,
I think the only parallel is probably Marion Barry, in my opinion.
Maybe I was going to say that, as opposed to a Bannon and a Manafort, he had a Rumsfeld and a Cheney. So I was gonna say that he had much better advisors. He had much, really, in my opinion, Bush was president in name only.
Right, right,
I
right,
didn't
right,
run for the team. Well,
right.
the truth was for his entire term. So, my point being is that, to your point, what is, like I even saw a recent poll. They just posted it. It was yesterday, yesterday or the day before, a poll on 2024 candidates. And do you know who had 58% approval
Who?
on that 2024 poll?
Trump?
Trump.
Yeah.
Trump. The closest, I think the next closest was Ted Cruz at like 16%. So
Right. He's
that if it really was left up to the people versus the people, the pro-Trump versus the anti-Trump. If it's truly left up to the people to decide, then why all the symbolism? Why all the pomp and circumstance?
right. To me, Trump is the most maligned politician since Marion Barry. To me, and if he makes a comeback, they'll be just like Marion Barry. If he makes a comeback and run in 2024, the people beg him to come back and run again. He was, to me, he was. They've been maligning Trump since soon as he got elected, talking about there was nobody at his, when he gets his election speech or whatever, there was nobody there, and blah blah, inauguration speech or whatever, there was nobody there, and then when the Russians did it, and he got impeached twice,
I can I can see I definitely I get the analogy. There are some differences because I think one of the biggest differences that Marion Barry really was a mayor of the people. Marion Barry, his entire time, he never lived in the mayor's mansion. He lived right there in Berry Farms in Southeast, right in the hood, right in the midst of his constituency. Never left the apartment. Never became above the people or separated himself from the people.
Fair point.
And I think garnered the people's loyalty. You couldn't say smack about Marion Barry in DC, or you would get smacked.
I'm talking about the fact that he got put out of office. It wasn't based on any of his policies. Just, we don't like this guy.
Right, no, I absolutely
We
get
gotta
it.
we gotta get rid of Marion Barry.
But he still has the same, Trump does still have the same loyal base that Marion Barry had as well. In other words, he's having a similar impact on his constituency that Marion Barry had on his.
But even looking at Marion, like, it's kind of hard to talk to young people who never saw Marion Barry, but you don't hear politicians speak the way Marion Barry spoke. You don't hear politicians speak the way Donald Trump speaks. Marion Barry took a position. This is what it is. Donald Trump takes a position. This is what it is. It's like a gunslinger, huh? They don't waffle. They don't cower. They don't hide. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So Marion Barry, when he spoke, it was just like you don't hear black men in public, a public forum, and the media even speak like that anymore. Marion Barry said, if Washington D.C. ain't good enough for you to live, it ain't good enough for you to work. If you're a city worker, we want you working in Washington D.C. If you can't live in Washington D.C., you can't work for the city. We're tired of people taking our tax base back to Northern Virginia and Southern Maryland. We're tired of it. You don't hear people speak like that anymore.
He drew a line in the sand. You knew where he stood.
Exactly.
Right or wrong. Like, whether you agree with it, you could disagree with it, you could argue about it, but you knew exactly where he stood. Exactly. And again, I think that's where the loyalty to Marion Barry came from, much like the loyalty to Trump came from. Although, I would argue that a significant amount of his policies ended up hurting his base. But when given, and it's interesting because, I think when given, it's kind of like, you might have a cousin or a family member that you can't stand. At least most of us have that family member that you can't stand to be around. For whatever reason. Right? Yeah, you just can't stand them. And it's normally, something to do with their character. However, and you can talk about that person all day long to their face. You can fight them. You can argue with them. But let some outsider.
Exactly.
The same way you talk to them. Let them put their hands on them the same way you put your hands on them.
Right.
You got a problem.
Right.
No, you're pro-family.
Right.
I think that's what we were saying. Because if you think back to Trump's first year, remember that GM deal? He was boasting about how he's bringing back the jobs to the country. He prevented GM from going to Mexico. He saved over 30,000 jobs. And what happened 6 months later? Same amount of jobs ended up leaving. And that was the first betrayal. And although it predated him with the ACA Act, however, Trump took that, card and ran with it in terms of encouraging the DOJ, encouraging the Republicans to go after the Affordable Care Act. And on number 57, 57 is the lucky number apparently. And finally, when the Democrats actually agreed to eliminating the individual mandate, which was tax penalty if you didn't have, a healthcare policy by the end of the year, you ended up getting penalized. That literally was the only piece. The entire plan was built on top of that individual mandate. As soon as the Democrats agreed that, hey, we no longer need that individual mandate, that's when the federal judge in Texas ended up ruling, and the DOJ won. But it was also under Trump that he continued to pursue that avenue, as opposed to telling the Republicans, listen, most of my constituency are benefiting from the Affordable Care Act. Most of my constituency are poor, and they are undereducated, and they are the largest beneficiaries of the Affordable Care Act. He encouraged it. Ended up pulling out the individual mandate. What happens? Significant amount of people end up getting their health care changed. Some end up losing their health care altogether because employers can no longer afford health care. So, in other words, when we look at the efficacy of his policies, to me, I found that he was pitting himself in a corner. He was losing his base the first 2 years. He was chipping away at his base significantly. Bannon ended up, leaving. Manafort ended up, like whole wave of supporters internally. It was a hot mess. To me, Democrats could have just done nothing almost, and just sat back and watched this thing self-implode. However, they pit us versus them. And when they ended up pitting, and to me, this is where the argument and where I put on my conspiracy theory hat a bit when it comes to Bernie. Because to me, Bernie was the bridge. When they took out Bernie and swapped him out for Biden, who had zero policy, just like you stated earlier. I never saw an economic plan from this man until the 23rd hour. So you've been in politics for 42 years. You don't have an economic plan coming into the primaries?
You don't even have a stance on abortion.
No, the man didn't have. his only and his sole purpose was to chant, "We got to beat Trump." The Democrats beat that drum over and over again. But the point being is that now you have a person that has come into office who is not necessarily advocating for anything. He's not advocating for the poor. He's not necessarily advocating for the rich either. He's not advocating for the disenfranchised. He's not advocating for the privileged. The man was a wet noodle. Like he had no stance whatsoever. So now you have this person, in other words, that's being pitted against the cousin you can't stand. And you got this whole group of outsiders that are now attacking the cousin that you were just trying to beat up.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. I understand. Yeah.
But now, you're defending this same cousin. All of a sudden, this cousin, his character isn't as bad. You were just shitting on the cousin, but because some outsiders are clowning him, now you got
Fair point. But it just seemed like there was a small group of Democrats and the corporate media and some corporations who want to decide who becomes president. They don't want Bernie to become the president because maybe his policies are gonna hurt them. They don't want Trump to become the president because he doesn't pay a genuine reflection to the media. He may not pay a genuine reflection to certain corporations. I don't think he necessarily plays a genuine reflection to Wall Street, even though he was adamant on the stock market rising. I don't think he necessarily pays a genuine reflection to Wall Street firms, and he doesn't pay a genuine reflection to the media. What president tells the media to go shove off? Get the fake news. Who does that? And just bypass the media and just goes on Twitter where we know the president's policy before the New York Times does.
right.
And so he was a threat to maybe some Wall Street firms and maybe also to definitely to the media. But it seems like there's a small cabal of people in the Democratic Party that wants to control the country, and they don't want Bernie. They don't want Bernie to be the president for whatever reason, and they don't want Trump to be the president. They like Biden because whatever Biden's policy is going to benefit them. So somebody's benefiting from Biden being the president. It's not necessarily the usual suspects, but they definitely don't want Trump to run again, and this may be the best thing for Trump. They may start begging people for Trump to run in a couple of years. The public may start begging him to run because Biden has inherited not necessarily a strong, obviously not a strong economy, and we don't necessarily know where he stands on a lot of these issues. You know what I'm saying? He can kind of waffle back and forth, and even though the media doesn't necessarily criticize him, they don't have to criticize him. You know what I'm saying? There's somebody said that this thing in Texas that happened while Trump was in office, this would be his third impeachment. He's been impeached for the third time. You know what I'm saying? But I think this Capitol riot is a commercial of what's gonna happen next. I think people feel disenfranchised. People feel like these corporations and people clicked up with certain politicians have gotten all the benefits of these policies, and the little man has not. It's just frustrating to a lot of people to have college costs rising at 3 times the rate of inflation, have gasoline prices rising, costs rising while the income is either stagnant or declining. And I think that's part of what the Capitol rise was about. I think that's part of what Charlottesville was about. And I think you're gonna see more of these flare-ups over time. And we've been talking about the social unrest for a while. But the other thing I think I find interesting is that racism stopped after Trump left office. You don't hear anybody in the media talking about how everything's racist now. You don't hear anybody in the media talking about all these. There hasn't been any police brutality since Trump left office. I think they're trying to make the Capitol riots out to be racism. It's gotten old. I think you turn a lot of black people off that everything's racist. The Capitol riots is racism. And
so, also to add to your point, white supremacy. Did you, well, one, within the last 2 years, I think this is the only time that I can remember mainstream media frequently using and labeling things as white supremacy, and not just white supremacists, as I think previously has been used to identify individuals as opposed to a system, an institution, which is what white supremacy is and describes. Now, all of a sudden, white supremacy is gone away. White supremacy is over.
But also on that point, when they start talking about white supremacy, they a lot of times talk about like not Antifa, but like the Proud Boys, a specific group that's so far to the right that, or they talk about the Republican Party, or talk about a white politician from the 40s and 50s. They always never any Democrats, never any liberals, never anybody current. It's always somebody from like the 1940s or 30s or something.
Yep, like let's do it as far back as we can detach people from, and use these extreme examples. And to me, like, it's insidious because it kind of takes away the idea that these same ideologies and practices can be done by your neighbor, can be done by your boss, by your coworker, by your friends, the people that are actively within a circle. So, because you don't have tattoos, because you're not wearing a flag, because you're not armed to the teeth, and you aren't, a doomsday prepper, and all of these other type of outwardly descriptors that would identify, like it almost harkens back to, Hoover's days of being a commie.
Right.
It's like, oh,
McCarthy.
Like you're wearing a fedora. You're a commie.
Right. I guess the new you're communist. The new your communist rant is you're a Trump supporter, right? It's like you're a Trump supporter. They brand you with that today, right?
That's exactly it.
But the thing about the racism thing and white supremacy thing is that a lot of the media, corporate media, whether it was the book industry or the corporate media, they get a pass for being racist because they're in New York and there's so much what's the word I'm looking for? So much racial diversity that they think that they get a pass for being racist because they assume that racial diversity, in New York, that means they're not racist.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So they get a pass. They get a pass for they can call out white supremacy, but you can't point the finger at them.
Right, and that's exactly it. But but to the earlier point as well, because I do agree with the fact that we've seen nothing change when Biden came into office. And although it's been a month, folks have been on this soapbox. Oh, you got to give him time, blah blah blah. But within the month, he's managed to execute 31 executive orders within that month. So like, to me, that eliminates that argument that someone can't be effective in 30 days time. But outside of just Biden, because when you look at even politicians like Stacey Abrams, who was, put on a soapbox, praised for her on the ground organizing, and even that's a kind of its own argument to deal with, of whether she was truly the grassroots organizer or if she were essentially kind of praised for this bottom up approach, meaning that folks that were actually doing the grassroots organizing for the Democrats, and simply Abrams was getting that getting praise for that and credited for that. But However, I think she just represents the status quo, in other words, that even Abrams was not organizing for a mass change.
Right.
She was organizing to beat Trump.
Right.
And to me, that speaks to the intent that Democrats never intended to change anything. They never intended to challenge any portion of the system. They never intended to challenge police brutality. They never intended to challenge any elements of white supremacy. They never intended to challenge any racial bias within the judicial system, within the legislative system.
So are you implying that you can be aggressive on getting the vote out and voter rights and not and not necessarily be progressive in other areas? Is that what you're suggesting?
That's exactly it.
I find that hard to believe.
All right. If you let a lot of these quote unquote even what is it? They call themselves the crew or the
the squad.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know why. I'm going to delete that. I'm not supposed to know that. I got too much free time on my hands.
Watching even AOC capitulate to Pelosi. So, watching Rashida Tlaib and Ayanna Pressley, and now they brought in Cori Bush, and I felt it almost feels like they've completed the circle, because now you brought in the real black person. Like you brought in the one that actually came from the hood and made good, whereas Ayanna Pressley, she's more the polished suburban black woman, got the immigrant woman. And it's like these different elements all coming together, and that somehow has been identified as progressive.
Right.
You watch this entire team, this entire squad of folks capitulate, make no stance and no line drawing to specifically fracture that party. They stood as a unified front to say, yeah, the priority is not the Green New Deal. The priority is not canceling student debt. The priority is not keeping and improving the Affordable Care Act. The priority is not making a federal jobs mandate. The priority is we must beat Trump. And even if that requires us going across the aisle within our own party, and now aligning with folks who have been vehemently against everything that has made us quote unquote progressive. And now you don't even hear from AOC, you know what I mean? Like, this was the time.
She has been oddly silent. She's been oddly silent over the past couple of weeks.
Say that again?
She has been oddly silent.
You know what? I watched the hearings, like I was telling you today, over the GameStop, and she was at that hearing. She wasn't present during the reparations hearing, but she was present during the GameStop hearing. Both her and Rashida Tlaib were present at today's hearing. But yeah, to your point, she's been low key in terms of a media visibility standpoint. Really haven't heard from her much at all, or even Ilhan Omar.
Right. She's acting like a grown up now, right?
Yeah.
If you want to last along Nancy Pelosi, you can't be radical for too long, right?
That's exactly it.
Right. So exactly. I guess it's kind of like what Dr. Cornell West would call careerists, people who talk pro-black so they can have a career.
Yep.
in whatever industry it is, whether it's politics or financial services or consulting. They want a career with McKinsey or Booz Allen for their own benefit. And it's not going to benefit, they don't want to be part of a Black ecosystem per se. They're doing it for their own personal career.
It reminds me, because we've seen this. So if you are familiar, there's a politician out of Trinidad, Eric Williams, and I was reminded today by a colleague of mine of how Eric Williams. So Eric Williams was a part of the pro-Black movement. So there was a Black Power movement that was happening really during the same time. So the 70s and the 80s. Black Power movement was happening that really was a post-civil rights movement where we saw the Black Panther Party rise, where we saw the internationalism that was happening really on the cusp of Malcolm, and just kind of spreading that internationalism and that diasporic unity, in other words. So Eric Williams wrote a phenomenal Race and Capitalism book and pushed the idea of anti-colonialism, anti-capitalism. He was responsible for radicalizing a significant portion of West Indians, not just Trinis, and making a significant contribution to the overall Black Power movement. However, man ended up winning and getting into office. And do you know what he did first when he got into office?
What?
He banned his book.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Did he change his name to the artist formerly known as Eric Williams? You can't read that. You can't read that. I'm embarrassed I wrote that.
He's the one that even banned. He's the one that even banned Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, from Trinidad. That's the reason why Kwame Ture never returned to Trinidad, because he was banned from Trinidad because he was a Pan-African socialist who was inspired by Eric Williams.
Jesus Christ.
So, when we look at history, in other words, we can see examples of folks that are deep within these movements, deep within the core of these ideologies that have picked up momentum and caused a movement of people. Not just espousing, getting on the soapbox, getting on TV, saying all these flowery words and ideas on a high intellectual level, but actually grassroots organizing, pushing the folks to action and organizing people to action, only for you to be the job holder that you're fighting against. And when I look at the squad, that's what I see. These were just careerists. They co-opted the language of progressives. They co-opted the ideas of socialists. They co-opted the organizing of grassroots folks, and they morphed into this, into this chameleon. And it's only that when they got into positions of influence and power that you get to see their true colors. You get to see their true nature, that they never had any intention of being progressive. They never had any intention of drawing a line in the sand, because to me, this was the time to fracture the Democratic Party. if there was ever a better time to have a third party, we already have a Green Party. Some folks, acknowledge that party, others don't. But to have a third party rise to power, this would have been the time to do that. Like you said, you had 80 million votes, that actually over 80 million, that went to Biden. Imagine what that would have been like had they drawn a line in the sand and said, no, all Democrats aren't built the same. Just because we're part of the same party doesn't mean we have the same intentions, goals, or objectives. And we're not budging until you meet our demands. We're standing on this side of the fence, although overall we're in the same household. So to me, the fact that the squad capitulated to the existing powers, they're just a modern day Eric Williams. like that's really
it. Okay, so we're gonna have one more parting shot, then we're gonna wrap up on the Capitol riots. But one thing one thing I've kind of like talked about for a while, the symbolism. I think a lot of African Americans want to be included. You have the people wearing, the women wearing chucks and pearls that get up, I guess in sort of some type of genuflection to Kamala Harris. You see like the marching band at Howard University at the inauguration. What president has a band at inauguration? When did that ever happen? So a lot of symbolism, and a lot of people want to feel included, and this resist Trump movement, and no policy behind it. I think we're basically, you and I are outnumbered. The people who want to resist Trump versus people who want to talk policy, we're outnumbered. But if everybody felt the same way we did, there would be no reason for this event, right?
Oh, that's absolutely it. And
right. But I think overall there are going to be more riots. I think you have a very small segment of society that have benefited from these policies over the past decade. Again, that's what Brexit was all about. Why people want to leave the EU. And you're going to have more riots. And the thing about the recent election, the Capitol riots, is that you have a lot of large, tens of millions of white Americans who feel disenfranchised, and we know how that ends. It's not going to end well. I'll leave it at that. So you get the last shot. You get the last call. Torian, take us home.
Yeah, I think it's one point that I've noticed, and to me, it was part of the consequence of the Capitol riots, that I largely disagree with, and for some time have kind of looked at with just an unsettling feeling, is the silencing of that group of folks. So, and I'll use Parler as an example. So I don't know if you're familiar with Parler.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, speaking of Parler, they just came back online, I believe yesterday, or the day before. Just recently, kind of announcing an independent technology. So I can assume that means that they built, their own network now, as opposed to being on an AWS or another shared network, and being subjected to someone else's rules for governance, in other words. But this active silencing, how Twitter banned, like Twitter, Facebook, Google. I'm like, first of all, who even uses Google for social media these days? But which to me was the red flag. Like Twitter and Facebook banning Trump was already a red flag, but it goes to speak to the symbolism. When you see Google and Pinterest banning, like, really, like, who uses Pinterest as a social media outlet in terms of engaging folks and talking about policy, etc., and organizing folks? No one uses Pinterest to organize groups of people. But the long and short is that, if anything, because obviously it's gotten quiet. It's a lot. So from a mainstream media perspective, um, I guess we're to assume that there's no activity, that all of a sudden white supremacists have gone away, that white supremacy itself has died, that racism has died. We're in a post-racial society, and the 76 million people that voted for Trump no longer count. They're no longer there. And to me, that's the dangerous part, because the FBI, the CIA, the DEA, the ATF, local police departments, including LAPD, NYPD, have already evidenced that these same folks make up the people that put on the uniforms. That's why you have an FBI that's literally jumping on Twitter asking for the public's help in identifying who people were that were completely front-facing cameras. And when you have technology that the NYPD uses in Penn Plaza, in one police plaza, that they have a technology that can track you anywhere you are in the city.
I know now. I know now.
Technology. So you mean to tell me that NYPD has the same technology that they use to track Osama bin Laden, but the FBI is on Twitter asking for the public's help to identify folks? Like, come on. Like, in other words, when it comes to bad actors that are white, we don't see the same energy and fervor on an enforcement level. And in my opinion, it's because they're one and the same.
Right.
You have a saying in Jamaica, police and thief brethren. It's like, meaning that the police and the thief are cut from the same cloth.
Right.
So you can't expect the police to attack the thief when the thief is the police.
Right.
So to silence this group and to push them underground, I don't think that we see the same level of outpouring that we've seen over the last 4 years, because over the last 4 years has been a consistent organizing from them. They've made themselves public. They come out from the shadows. The militias have come out from the shadows. Those that were already mainstream remain mainstream and doubled down. But now all of those folks have gotten pushed to the edge again. So I'm not sure that we see the same consistency in, public demonstrations and marches. I think we see one big one. I think we see, because these folks have been now pushed underground, and has really just fueled their suspicions that they're being silenced, that the left and liberals have control of the government, have control of the media, and control enough to kick Trump out, capture a whole election process, in other words. So it didn't take much to fuel that, fire. So because of that, it doesn't take much to convince that same group of people that we need to speak in coded language.
Oh.
We need to stay away from posting on Facebook. We need to stay away from organizing on Twitter. We need to stay away from organizing in a public light where people can readily identify the groups that we belong to, our ideologies, and when we're coming together. So because of that, I think that's where we see a mass event happening, where they will rear their head. Whether that's going to be, sometime within the next 4 years, sometime within the next 8 years, time will tell. But that's, kind of my take on this insurrection, is that really it was a confirmation bias for them. Yeah, it really wasn't the thing that I think media was making it out to be, that this attempt to topple the government. It really wasn't uh, a yeah. It just really wasn't the effort
No.
that mainstream media was trying to make it to be, that it could have been. Like, if these folks, like to your earlier point, these folks have literally raised whole black towns, have raised by fire entire black towns. These are these same folk grandparents, parents in some aspect, that pass down these stories as moments of pride, as moments of American history. So to take out a politician, that's a mantelpiece. To capture a governor of a state, that's a mantelpiece. That's a story that you pridefully tell to the kids and the grandkids, that I stood for democracy and freedom against all enemies of the Constitution, foreign and domestic. So you know what I mean. So
Right.
you
Right.
know that insurrection, nah, that was not an insurrection. That was a confirmation bias.
Right. Right.
And the way that the Democrats and really liberals have handled this situation, I think we do see it, depending on either who's going to replace Trump, or if Trump reemerges in 2024. And I think that that's when we'll see the reemergence of these same, essentially, the 76 million people who have magically disappeared in our mind's eye. I think we see a reemergence of them, and I think we're going to see, that the both the extremist version of them, but also the same version that we consider centrist. The same folks that, I can have a beer with this person, and he's my friend. Yep, you're gonna see that same person marching and rioting, and with the real insurrection, depending on who's going to lead that pack. And I think that's what's going to make the difference of whether it's going to be a Trump, or if it's going to be someone that uh, almost comes in like an Obama,
Hmm.
that comes in as a Trojan horse, that
Hmm.
speaks the language of the centrists, that presents themselves uh, as the conservative with democratic tendencies, to only step into office and open the door and open the gate. So, I think we either see some version of a Trojan horse, or we see, someone completely outspoken that's willing to draw a line in the sand, whether that's Trump, or someone else. But that's my, I guess, my overall take on it. And I guess that's the thing that I'm personally waiting for. Because I do think that, they're plotting, they're planning, and it's only a matter of time.
Okay. Well, and all that in that your parting shot. I know that you didn't seem like you're not really giving Biden re-election like it's almost like not in it's not really a an issue for you, or not like something that's in the forefront of your mind. I know it's like almost like Biden is like almost like nobody thinks he's gonna get reelected almost.
I'm not sure if he's going to live to get real.
Right. Right.
Honestly, I I was surprised that Trump, because I would have bet money on it if someone would have bet against me, that Trump would have challenged competency, because Biden was displaying signs of dementia, and mental competency, which is a part of holding office of any elected office, not just president, but obviously impact as president being greater. So yeah, I'm genuinely surprised that I didn't see that legal challenge from Trump's team to challenge Biden's mental capacity to hold election, but because this man has, like either, yeah, man, like I can't just chuck it up to bad memory. It's like, well, you just said these things 2 days ago. You were already saying a complete 180 and denying that you said the thing that you said 2 days ago.
Well, but Trump may
yeah.
have given the country the gift of missing him. So
Say it again.
Trump may have given the country the gift of missing him. So everybody, the country wanted Biden. We're gonna get what we're looking for. Biden got what he wished for. And we'll see what happens over the next 4 years. But as far as the YouTube videos, we need people to subscribe to the channel, share the video and like the videos. I know people are been watching these videos for a while and lifting content off of here, not citing the source. So if you're gonna interact with these videos, I need you to share the videos and subscribe to the channel. But that's thanks again to Torian Mitchell. That's Trump and the G Parses the Capitol riots, also known as Just That Heat. So we're back in 2 weeks with some more interesting things to discuss. Thanks again to Torian, and I'm out.
All right. Thanks.